to soldering the jump ring to the back of the moth, and I'm also going to solder this piece of silver tube. It's about 10mm in length, and it's 1mm internal diameter. I think it's about 1.6mm external diameter, so it's got 0.3mm wall, so it's very, very thin. So you need to be a bit careful when you're soldering this. This is going to be where we're putting the brooch pin through to hold that to make like a little hinge mechanism. I'm also going to create a little hook on this side from a piece of scrap silver, but I'll do that after I've soldered this into place, and then we can work out the positioning for this afterwards, just in case anything moves while it's being soldered. So coming in again, just heating the piece up, and going to use some spray flux to keep things in place. As the tube disappears off the side, we'll pick that back up again in a second. You just want to get a nice even coating of the spray flux across this. It really does make a massive difference to the amount of cleanup that you have to do. It really protects the silver. I'm just going to save the piece of tube that rolled straight off the side of the solder block there. And we'll just position that back on to the side. What you want to make sure when you're positioning it is that you're going to have enough space that isn't seen for where the pin is going to go. So that's why I've chosen to put it a little bit lower down. If I'd have put it further up here, you'd have seen the brooch pin when it was being worn as a necklace as well. So you need to just give a little bit of consideration to your positioning of pieces when you're doing this. I'm just going to take this off so you can see again, we've got that obvious mark where the solder needs to go. Because the tube decided to run off the side, we don't have that, but we can see where it needs to be. Just going to pop some pieces of solder into those gaps. Oops, that one dropped. I'm using hard solder here again. I typically use just hard solder for most things, and then I'll move on to easy solder if I need to put any extra bits and pieces on. But you can use any solder that you're comfortable with using. The only thing that I wouldn't use for this is paste solder, and that's just because you tend to get quite a lot of runoff with paste solder. It's great for closing jump rings and things, but I'm not as fond of it for doing big pieces of soldering. So now I've got the solder pallions positioned, I'm just going to add a little bit of flux to the tube, and that will stick it in place so it doesn't roll off again. Just gently heat that so it bubbles. There we go, that should be stuck down nicely. And now I'm going to concentrate the heat around the entire piece, because this is quite a big piece of metal. You need to work around the whole piece to actually get it up to temperature. So you just move that, and hopefully you should start to see that go. Oops. See, that's flowed, but that's flowed up onto the jump ring. Move this round. Kind of concentrating behind the tube and a little bit onto it to just try and get that solder to flow. Turn my piece slightly. I can see that that's moved ever so slightly. Let me just nudge that solder a bit closer, or rather move that tube a bit closer. I just have to manoeuvre that round a little bit. What I'm going to do is actually move this and put it onto a solder grid, just so that it's raised off and the heat can get underneath, and we might find that that's better for the soldering. It can be really helpful to do when you've actually got a bigger piece that you're trying to solder. So this is a piece of steel mesh, so you can see it with the holes through it, so we can actually conduct the flame underneath the piece. So just going to get the flame underneath. You can just see that bit of solder's moved again. That one bit of solder is determined it's not going to go in there. I've just moved to a slightly bigger torch. This is a blazer style torch, so it's still a hand torch, but it will get the piece hotter quicker, hopefully, and that should help the solder to flow. So again, I'm just going to heat around the piece. You can direct the flame underneath because we've got the mesh, and you can see where the flame's hitting, which will be heating up the piece. I'm just using a turntable under the mesh as well, which helps to be able to control the flame around the piece. Okay, that looks like the jump ring's soldered on, and the tube also went at the same time. Just make sure that's pulled through. That looks like it should be nicely adhered. So we can pop this piece into the pickle to just clean it up, and I will cut a piece of silver to make the little catch for the brooch pin, which will then be soldered over onto this side.